30 minutes after I gave birth to my daughter, my husband looked down at her tiny red face and said, "I want a DNA test." At first, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. The room still smelled like antiseptic and sweat. My whole body felt hollowed out. I was shaking from exhaustion while a nurse adjusted the blood pressure cuff, squeezing my arm every few minutes. Outside the hospital window, the Dayton skyline looked dark and blurry under freezing February rain. And there was Eric, standing beside the bassinet with his arms crossed like he was reviewing paperwork instead of looking at his newborn daughter. "This baby might not be mine," he said. I stared at him. Not angry yet, just confused. My brain felt slow and heavy after 18 hours of labor. I remember blinking at the fluorescent lights above me, trying to make sense of what he'd just said while our daughter made these tiny squeaking noises beside the bed. The nurse froze. Not completely. She kept moving, but slower now. Careful. Like someone walking across ice. "Eric," I whispered, "what are you talking about?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "You were gone in Chicago during that conference." I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because my mind rejected the situation completely. "You mean the school counselor conference?" I asked. "You were there 3 nights. I called you every night." "That doesn't prove anything." The words landed harder than I expected. I looked over at my mother-in-law, Patricia, who was sitting near the window in one of those stiff hospital chairs with a foam cup of coffee in her hands. She wasn't shocked. That was the first thing I noticed. She looked terrified. Not surprised, not angry at him, terrified. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup so hard the lid bent inward. "Eric," she said quietly, "maybe this isn't the time." But he kept going. "I'm just saying the timing doesn't sit right with me." I remember looking down at Emma then. She was wrapped in that striped hospital blanket with her little fist pressed against her cheek. 10 fingers, tiny nose, thick dark hair already sticking up. And somehow my husband was treating her like evidence in a court case. A nurse named Marcy finally cleared her throat. She looked about 60. Gray curls tucked under her scrub cap, reading glasses hanging around her neck. "Sir," she said carefully, "your wife just delivered a baby less than an hour ago." Eric shrugged. "I'm not accusing anybody. I'm asking for certainty." I wish I could tell you I exploded. I didn't. That's the strange thing about humiliation. Sometimes it doesn't hit all at once. Sometimes it arrives quietly, piece by piece, until suddenly you can't breathe right. I looked at Eric, really looked at him. The man I'd been married to for 11 years. The man who held my hand through 2 miscarriages. The man who cried in the Olive Garden parking lot 3 years earlier after another failed fertility treatment. And now here he was staring at me like I was some woman he barely trusted. My stomach turned. "You think I cheated on you?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. That conference was right around the conception window. Conception window. He said it like a man reading from a medical chart. I felt something inside me go cold. Patricia stood up suddenly. "Eric, enough." But he ignored her too. I deserved to know the truth. That sentence did it. Not the accusation, not the timing. The arrogance. Like he was the victim in this room. I slowly reached for my phone on the tray table beside the bed. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. Eric frowned. "Who are you calling?" I unlocked the screen and scrolled through my contacts. Linda. Patricia whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Please don't make big decisions tonight." I looked directly at her. "Funny," I said softly. "Nobody warned your son about that 30 minutes ago." Then I pressed call. Donna Ruiz answered on the 3rd ring. "Linda." Donna had been my closest friend since college. She lived in Cincinnati now and practiced family law. Sharp as a razor. Divorced twice herself and proud of surviving both. I swallowed hard. "Donna," I said, my voice cracking, "I need you to prepare divorce papers." The room went silent. Eric actually laughed. Not loud, just one short disbelieving laugh. "Oh, come on," he said, "you're being dramatic." That word hit me harder than the accusation. Dramatic. I had spent 18 hours in labor. I still had an IV in my arm. I could barely sit upright without pain shooting through my body. And somehow I was the dramatic one. Donna's voice sharpened instantly through the phone. "What happened?" I kept my eyes on Eric. "My husband asked for a DNA test half an hour after our daughter was born." There was a pause. Then Donna said very calmly, "I'll drive up tomorrow." Eric rolled his eyes and walked toward the window. "This is ridiculous." Patricia looked like she might faint. She sat back down slowly and pressed her fingers against her forehead. "Linda," she whispered, "please, wait for the results before you start digging into things." Digging. That word stayed with me. Not fighting. Not leaving. Digging. I noticed Marcy noticing it too. The nurse quietly adjusted Emma's blanket before leaning closer to me. In a low voice only I could hear, she said, "Honey, pay attention to how a person acts when you're vulnerable. That usually tells you everything." Then she squeezed my shoulder and left the room. The rain tapped softly against the hospital window. Eric stood with his back to me, checking his phone like none of this was unusual. Patricia kept staring at the floor, and I sat there in that hospital bed holding my newborn daughter, realizing I suddenly didn't know the man I married. But worse than that, I had the awful feeling his mother knew something I didn't. At around 3 a.m, they wheeled me down the hallway toward recovery. The hospital corridors were quiet except for distant monitor beeps and the squeak of rubber wheels against tile floors. Patricia walked beside my bed, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. Right before the nurse pushed me into the recovery room, Patricia leaned down close to me. Her voice shook. "Linda," she whispered, "please don't go looking for things you can't undo." Then she stepped back immediately like she regretted saying it. I stared at her while the nurse rolled me inside. And for the first time that night I stopped thinking about the DNA test. Because suddenly I was wondering what Patricia was so afraid I might find. 3 days after Emma was born, I brought her home to our house in Kettering, during the ugliest freezing rain Ohio had seen all winter. The neighborhood looked gray and tired. Bare trees, slushy sidewalks, dirty snow piled near mailboxes. Somebody across the street still had half their Christmas lights hanging down, even though it was February. Eric carried the car seat inside without saying much. Not rude, not warm either. Just distant, like a man waiting on test results from a mechanic. I remember standing in our kitchen while the garage door rattled shut behind him. The dishwasher hummed softly. Somebody on our street was running a snowblower, even though there wasn't enough snow left to justify it. Normal sounds, normal life, but everything inside me felt off balance. A casserole from our neighbor Diane sat on the counter wrapped in foil beside a pack of newborn diapers from Costco. Somebody from church had left flowers near the sink. Congratulations balloons still floated near the dining room table. And somehow my marriage already felt dead. Emma started crying around 6 that evening while I was trying to figure out breastfeeding for the 100th time. Nobody tells you how exhausting it is at first. Your whole life becomes measured in ounces, burping, and whether another human being has pooped recently. I sat in the nursery glider half awake while Emma fussed against my chest. Eric stood in the doorway. "We should probably schedule the test this week," he said. I looked up slowly. Not because I didn't hear him, because I honestly couldn't believe he was bringing it up again while I was leaking breast milk through a Dayton Dragons t-shirt and running on maybe 90 minutes of sleep. "You really think I cheated on you?" He sighed dramatically like I was making things difficult. "I think we need clarity." "There is clarity. You don't know that." I laughed quietly to myself. Not happy laughter. The kind people do when they realize a conversation no longer belongs in reality. Eric folded his arms. "Look, once everything comes back, we can move forward." Move forward. Like I was some temporary problem he planned to solve. I looked down at Emma sleeping against me and suddenly felt something strange. Not heartbreak anymore. Distance. Like I was already beginning to emotionally step away from him. That first week home was awful. Not because of the baby. Because of the atmosphere. Eric started sleeping in the guest room temporarily. He claimed Emma's crying kept him awake for work, but I knew better. He wanted space from me while he waited for his precious DNA results. And somehow, even without directly accusing me publicly, he managed to spread suspicion everywhere. My phone started buzzing with weird messages. "Thinking of your family during this stressful season. Marriage goes through hard patches. Praying for wisdom and healing." Nobody came out and asked if I cheated. They didn't have to. Eric had already planted the seed. One afternoon while Emma slept in her swing beside the couch, I overheard Eric talking quietly in the kitchen. "I'm just being cautious," he told somebody on the phone. "Men get trapped all the time." I closed my eyes. Trapped. That word sat in my chest like acid. 2 miscarriages, 3 rounds of fertility treatment, thousands of dollars in medical bills, years of heartbreak. And now I was apparently trapping him. Patricia came over almost every day, always carrying something. Baby blankets, frozen soup, tiny socks from Target. She moved around the house nervously, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. One afternoon she reorganized my spice rack for no reason at all. That's when I knew she was anxious. Patricia only cleaned when she was upset. "Sweetheart," she said while wiping an already clean countertop, "men get scared after babies are born." I stared at her. Do they usually accuse their wives of cheating in the maternity ward? She flinched. A child changes everything. So does humiliation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I noticed she'd stopped defending Eric directly. Instead, she kept talking about family, stability, forgiveness, like she was trying to hold together a collapsing wall with both hands. Around the second week, exhaustion really hit me. Not movie exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind where you cry because you dropped a spoon. I hadn't washed my hair properly in 4 days. My stitches still hurt every time I stood up too quickly. Emma wanted to feed constantly, and every room in the house smelled faintly like formula laundry detergent and cold coffee. One evening, Eric came home carrying flowers from Kroger. Yellow carnations, the cheap kind near the checkout lanes. I thought we could try having a good night, he said. I almost laughed at the absurdity. 3 hours earlier, he'd texted asking whether I'd be willing to sign paperwork for the DNA lab. Now he was buying discount flowers like we were fixing a minor argument about groceries. He sat beside me on the couch while ESPN played quietly in the background. Emma slept in my lap. You know, he said carefully, if everything comes back fine, we can put all this behind us. I turned slowly toward him. He rubbed his face. Linda stopped twisting my words. No, I said softly. You already twisted enough. He stood up immediately irritated. This is exactly what I mean. Everything turns into drama with you lately. There it was again. Drama. Emotional. Unstable. The slow little language tricks that make women doubt their own reactions. I stood up too fast trying to move Emma to her bassinet and nearly lost balance. A bottle attached to my breast pump tipped sideways and spilled milk directly across Eric's open laptop sitting on the coffee table. Oh, come on, he snapped. He grabbed the computer instantly. Not Emma. Not me. The computer. Do you know how expensive this thing is? I looked down at our sleeping daughter, then back at him panicking over electronics while his newborn sat 3 feet away. And something inside me hardened permanently. Later that night, Patricia came over unexpectedly carrying a bag of hand-me-down baby clothes. Some things from church friends, she explained. I barely had energy to argue anymore. Emma had finally fallen asleep around midnight, so I sat on the living room floor sorting tiny pajamas while Patricia folded blankets nearby. That's when I found the card. It slipped out from inside a little blue sweater. The envelope was old and bent at the corners. On the front, written in shaky cursive, Happy 13th birthday, Caleb. Love always, Grandma Pat. I froze. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Patricia saw the card in my hand and moved faster than I'd seen her move in weeks. Oh, she said quickly, snatching it away. That's nothing. I stared at her. Who's Caleb? Her face changed instantly. Too quickly. A boy from church. I said nothing. Because people don't usually sign birthday cards to random boys from church as Grandma. Patricia shoved the card back into the bag. You're overtired, she said. You shouldn't overthink things right now. Then she left almost immediately. At 3:42 that morning, I sat in the nursery feeding Emma under the dim yellow lamp beside the rocking chair. The house creaked softly around us. Snow tapped lightly against the windows. And I opened Facebook. Patricia's page was mostly church potlucks, Bible verses, and blurry family photos. But eventually I found it. An old comment from a woman named Sandra Miller in Indianapolis. Caleb still asks about his dad. Please tell Eric to call him. I stared at the screen so long my phone dimmed. Then I looked down at my daughter sleeping against my chest. And for the first time since the hospital, the DNA test stopped mattering entirely. Because suddenly I realized Patricia wasn't afraid I cheated. She was afraid I'd discover what her son had been hiding. I didn't confront Eric right away. That surprised me. A younger version of me probably would have marched straight into the kitchen, waving screenshots and demanding answers. But exhaustion changes you. Motherhood changes you faster. By the 3rd week after Emma was born, I felt like I was living in 40-minute intervals. Feed the baby. Change the baby. Wash bottles. Cry a little. Repeat. Meanwhile, Eric moved through the house, acting almost normal again, which somehow made everything worse. He kissed Emma's forehead before work every morning, took out the trash, watched old episodes of NCIS in the evenings like we were a regular suburban couple working through a rough patch. Then every few days he'd casually mention the DNA test again. Like a reminder. Like a leash. I finally called Donna late one night after Eric went to bed. Emma had been screaming for nearly 2 hours straight with gas pains, and I was sitting on the laundry room floor because it was the only dark, quiet place in the house. I found something, I whispered. Donna listened quietly while I explained the birthday card, Sandra's comment, and Patricia's reaction. When I finished, there was silence for a moment. Then Donna asked, "Do you want the truth or do you want reassurance?" "That sounds like a lawyer question." "It is." I leaned my head against the dryer. "I want to know if my entire marriage was fake." Donna exhaled slowly. "Then don't confront him yet." That was hard to hear. Every instinct in me wanted answers immediately. But Donna explained something I didn't fully understand at the time. People who lie for years don't suddenly become honest because they're cornered. They just get smarter. So instead of confronting Eric, I started paying attention. Real attention. The kind you only start giving once trust dies. I noticed he always stepped outside to take certain calls. I noticed he turned his phone face down now. I noticed Patricia stopped mentioning Indianapolis completely. One afternoon, Eric left his jacket hanging over the kitchen chair while he showered upstairs. His phone buzzed inside the pocket. I stared at it for almost a full minute. I hated myself for even considering it. Then Emma started fussing in her swing beside me, and something about hearing my daughter cry while living inside this cloud of lies pushed me over the edge. I pulled out the phone. The screen lit up immediately. "Sandra Caleb's game starts at 7. He keeps asking if you're coming this time." My stomach dropped. There it was. No explanation possible. No misunderstanding. Just truth. Simple and ugly. I put the phone back exactly where I found it right before Eric came downstairs. For the rest of that evening, I moved through the house like a ghost. Eric grilled frozen burgers for dinner while snow fell outside. At one point, he smiled at Emma sleeping in her bassinet and said, "She's starting to look more like me." I almost laughed so hard I thought I might choke. 2 days later, Donna drove up from Cincinnati to meet me at a Panera Bread near the Dayton Mall. I brought Emma in her carrier. Donna brought legal pads and a face that already looked tired on my behalf. She listened carefully while I explained the text message. Then she asked one question. "How much money do you have access to right now?" I blinked at her. "That's your first concern." "That's my biggest concern." Turns out betrayal gets very practical once lawyers enter the picture. Donna explained that if Eric had another family hidden somewhere, there was a good chance money had been hidden too. And she was right. Within a week, we discovered almost $18,000 missing from our joint savings. Eric claimed it was temporary financial planning. Donna called it preparation. I called it panic. Hiring a private investigator sounded dramatic when Donna first suggested it. Like something from a TV show old people watch while eating microwave dinners. But reality was less glamorous. The investigator was a tired former police officer named Rick, who met me inside a Bob Evans off Interstate 75 and charged by the hour. I sold my grandmother's gold charm bracelet to afford the retainer. That hurt more than I expected. My grandmother raised me after my mother died. That bracelet was one of the few things I had left from her. I sat in my car outside the jewelry store afterward and cried while Emma slept in the back seat. Not because of the money. Because I realized my marriage had reached the point where I was selling family heirlooms to uncover another family. Rick worked quickly, though. Within 10 days, he confirmed everything. Eric had been making regular trips to Indianapolis for years. Not work trips, personal visits. Sandra Miller existed, so did Caleb. There were hotel receipts, bank transfers, and a second phone line registered under Eric's name. And Patricia had mailed birthday gifts to Indianapolis nearly every year. When Rick handed me the folder at a diner in Beaver Creek, I actually felt nauseated. Not shocked anymore. Just tired. So incredibly tired. That same afternoon, Emma had a meltdown inside Meijer while I was buying diapers and formula. The kind of public baby scream that makes every shopper turn and stare. I stood there near the pharmacy aisle, bouncing her awkwardly while trying not to cry myself. An older woman walked past and smiled sympathetically. "Long day?" she asked. I almost laughed. "Lady, you have no idea." By then, I was barely sleeping. My body still hurt. My marriage was collapsing. And every new truth felt heavier than the last. There was one moment that nearly broke me completely. I was sitting in the driveway one evening after grocery shopping while Emma slept in her car seat. I had Rick's folder beside me. I had proof. Actual proof. And all I wanted in that moment was to walk inside, hand it back to Eric, and beg him to explain everything in a way that somehow made sense. Not because I believed him anymore. Because part of me still missed the version of him I thought existed. I called Donna crying so hard I could barely talk. "I don't even know what I'm grieving anymore," I admitted. Donna was quiet for a second. Then she said something I never forgot. "Linda, missing who you thought he was is not the same thing as needing who he actually is." A week later, I finally contacted Sandra. I expected anger. Instead, I got exhaustion. We met at a diner outside Indianapolis called Mel's Family Restaurant, one of those places with faded pie posters and endless coffee refills. Sandra looked older than her Facebook pictures. Not old exactly. Worn down. Like somebody who'd spent years carrying disappointment quietly. Caleb wasn't there. Thank God. I didn't think a 14-year-old boy deserved front-row seats to this disaster. Sandra folded her hands around a coffee mug while I explained what happened at the hospital. When I told her Eric demanded a DNA test 30 minutes after Emma was born, she stared at me in disbelief. Then she laughed once. A bitter little laugh. He accused me of cheating too, she said. I blinked. What? Years ago. Anytime he felt guilty about something, suddenly I was suspicious. That sentence settled over the table heavily. Projection. That's what Donna later called it. Eric accused women of betrayal because he lived inside betrayal himself. Sandra finally told me the full timeline. She met Eric 15 years earlier at a trade show in Indianapolis. Caleb was born 14 years ago. Then Eric married me 11 years ago while telling Sandra our relationship was basically over. Patricia knew everything. Every birthday. Every payment. Every lie. At some point, Sandra looked at me sadly and said, "He told me you were unstable." I surprised myself by laughing softly. He told me I was unfaithful. For the first time all afternoon, Sandra smiled a little too. Not because anything was funny. Because both of us finally understood the same awful truth. Eric had built two women inside two different lies. When I walked back to my car afterward, snowflakes drifted softly through the Indianapolis parking lot. Emma slept peacefully in the back seat. And sitting there on my phone was the DNA lab email. I opened it with shaking hands. Probability of paternity 99.9998%. Eric was Emma's father. Of course he was. I already knew that. But suddenly the cruelty of what he'd done hit me all over again. He humiliated me in a hospital bed because he couldn't live with his own guilt. I sat there crying quietly while snow collected along the windshield. Not because I'd lost him. Because I finally understood there had never been just one betrayal. There had been hundreds. Small ones. Daily ones. Carefully managed ones. And somehow I'd spent 11 years loving a man who treated truth like something flexible. Before I left the diner parking lot, Sandra asked one final question through my rolled-down window. "What are you going to do now?" I looked at Emma sleeping behind me. Then I looked back at Sandra. And for the first time in weeks, my voice sounded steady. "I'm going to make sure he never gets to call me crazy again." By the time July rolled around, I had lost almost 20 pounds without trying. Stress will do that. So will living on reheated coffee and whatever you can eat one-handed while holding a baby. Ohio summers are miserable in a very specific way. Thick, humid air. Mosquitoes the size of raisins. Lawnmowers running non-stop by 8 in the morning. And somehow, despite my marriage collapsing in slow motion, the rest of the world kept acting normal. Kids rode bikes through the neighborhood. People argued over mulch at Home Depot. The local news spent 3 straight days talking about fireworks safety. Life just kept moving. Patricia insisted on hosting her annual 4th of July barbecue anyway. She called me personally the week before. "Linda," she said carefully, "families need moments to heal." I nearly laughed into the phone. Heal. That woman talked about healing the same way insurance companies talk about compassion. Very professionally, not very honestly. Still, I agreed to come. Not for Patricia. Not for Eric. For myself. Because Donna was right about one thing. If you let Eric control the story she told me, he'll rewrite your entire marriage before the divorce is final. And he already had started trying. Apparently, I was emotionally unstable after childbirth. Apparently, I was overreacting. Apparently, poor Eric had simply asked reasonable questions. Funny how men like that always turn cruelty into concern once witnesses appear. The barbecue started around 4 in the afternoon. Patricia's backyard looked exactly the same as every other 4th of July I'd spent there over the years. Plastic folding chairs. Cheap red, white, and blue tablecloths from Walmart. Potato salad sweating in the heat. Classic rock playing softly through an old Bluetooth speaker near the porch. Neighbors drifting in and out through the side gate carrying beer coolers and desserts. If you glanced quickly, it looked like a happy American family gathering. That was the strange part. How ordinary betrayal can look from the outside. Emma was almost 5 months old by then. I carried her against my shoulder as relatives crowded around pretending everything was normal. She's getting so big. She has Eric's eyes. Such a blessing. I smiled politely while feeling like I was walking through a staged performance. Eric moved around the yard confidently all afternoon. That irritated me more than anger would have. He looked comfortable, relaxed, like a man convinced he'd already survived the worst of things. At one point, I watched him laughing beside the grill with his Uncle Gary while holding Emma. For just a second, I saw the man I married again. The version who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen once when we were broke and 29. The version who held me after my second miscarriage and whispered we'd survive it together. That memory hit hard enough to make me step away toward the patio. Because grief gets confusing when the person who hurt you also gave you some of your happiest memories. Sandra arrived around 6:30. Quietly. No dramatic entrance, just a silver Honda pulling into the curb outside Patricia's house. She came alone at first. Caleb stayed in the car because neither of us wanted him dragged into adult ugliness unless absolutely necessary. Sandra wore jean sandals and a plain green blouse. Nothing flashy, nothing theatrical. She looked nervous. Honestly, so did I. Patricia spotted her through the kitchen window and nearly dropped a tray of hamburger buns. That was the moment I knew she finally understood this wasn't fixable anymore. Eric hadn't noticed Sandra yet. He was too busy performing. Around 7:30, after people finished eating, Eric stood up near the patio holding a beer bottle. Then he tapped a spoon lightly against the glass. That stupid little sound still lives in my head. Clink, clink, clink. Everybody quieted down. Patricia looked pale already. Eric smiled tightly. Well, he said I guess we should finally clear up some rumors. I felt Emma shifting sleepily against my chest. Humidity clung to my skin. Fireworks cracked faintly somewhere in the distance across Dayton. The DNA results came back, Eric announced. A few relatives exchanged awkward glances. Then he smiled wider. Emma is my daughter. Several people clapped politely. Not enthusiastically. More relieved than happy. And then Eric made the biggest mistake of his life. He looked directly at me and said, "And because I believe families deserve second chances, I'm willing to forgive Linda for all the stress this situation caused." The yard went quiet. I actually felt my heartbeat slow down. Not speed up. Slow down. Because suddenly every last bit of doubt disappeared. This man truly believed he was the victim. I stood carefully adjusting Emma against my shoulder. "Eric," I said calmly, "I'm glad you brought up forgiveness." His smile faded slightly. "Because before anybody here talks about forgiveness," I continued, "they deserve the truth." Patricia whispered sharply, "Linda." I ignored her. Eric gave a tired little chuckle like I was embarrassing myself. "Don't do this," he warned quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said the truest thing I'd felt in months. "You accused me of cheating while I was still bleeding in a hospital bed. You don't get to decide what's uncomfortable anymore." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the kids running around with sparklers seemed quieter suddenly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Donna had helped me organize everything carefully beforehand. No screaming. No chaos. Just facts. I connected my phone to Patricia's backyard television mounted near the porch. The first image appeared on screen immediately. Emma's DNA results. Probability of paternity 99.9998%. Eric rolled his eyes instantly. "We already know that." "Yes," I said softly. "Now let's move on to the part you forgot to mention." Next came bank transfers, hotel receipts, phone records, pictures of Eric entering Sandra's apartment building in Indianapolis. The silence in that backyard became suffocating. Uncle Gary lowered his beer slowly. One of Patricia's church friends actually whispered, "Oh my Lord." Eric stepped toward me fast. "You went through my private records?" I almost laughed. That was his concern. Privacy. Not lying. Not betrayal. Privacy. Sandra finally walked forward from near the side gate. Eric froze when he saw her. Actually froze. For the first time all year, I saw genuine fear on his face. Sandra looked directly at him. Then she said quietly, "You told me your marriage ended years ago." Nobody spoke. Patricia sat down heavily in one of the folding chairs like her knees stopped working. Eric recovered quickly, though. Men like him usually do. "This is being twisted," he snapped. "Sandra's an old friend." Sandra stared at him in disbelief. "An old friend whose son calls you dad." That landed hard. You could physically feel the shift in the yard after that sentence. Eric looked around desperately, searching for support. Most people avoided eye contact. Except Patricia. She was crying openly now. Pat Uncle Gary asked slowly, "You knew about this?" Patricia covered her mouth with shaking fingers. I was trying to keep the family together. I finally looked directly at her. "No," I said quietly. "You were helping him manage 2 families." Eric pointed toward me suddenly. "She's emotional. She just had a baby." Sandra barked out one harsh laugh. "That's exactly what you told me about her." And there it was. The pattern. Same manipulation, different woman. Eric realized too late that his own lies matched too perfectly. One of his cousins muttered under his breath, "Jesus Christ." Eric's face started turning red. "You're ruining everything," he snapped at me. I shook my head slowly. "No, Eric, I stopped protecting it." Then I handed him the divorce papers, actual physical papers. Donna insisted on that part. "Sometimes reality needs weight," she'd said. Eric stared at them without touching them. Around us, fireworks burst somewhere beyond the neighborhood trees. Tiny flashes of red and gold reflected across Patricia's backyard television screen. Nobody looked festive anymore. Nobody looked comfortable. Good. For once, the discomfort belonged to him. As I turned toward the driveway carrying Emma, Eric called after me. "You're going to regret this." I stopped beside the gate. Then I looked back at the man who'd spent months trying to make me question my own sanity. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is not realizing sooner your accusation was really a confession." Then I left. No dramatic music. No applause. Just humid Ohio air and fireworks exploding over somebody else's celebration, while I buckled my daughter into her car seat with shaking hands. Driving away from Patricia's house, I expected triumph. What I felt instead was exhaustion. Relief, too. But mostly exhaustion. Because revenge sounds glamorous when people talk about it online. In real life, it feels like paperwork, panic attacks, and trying not to cry at red lights while your baby sleeps in the back seat. 6 months after the 4th of July barbecue, Emma and I lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse in Miamisburg, with beige carpeting, thin walls, and a kitchen so small I could open the refrigerator or the dishwasher, but not both at the same time. Honestly, I hated it at first. Not because it was ugly, because it represented failure in my mind. At 39, I thought I'd already built my permanent life. Then suddenly I was unpacking paper plates from Walmart while my daughter napped beside moving boxes. The first night there, I sat on the living room floor eating microwave macaroni while Emma slept in a second-hand bassinet beside me. Outside, somebody's dog barked nonstop. The upstairs neighbor walked like he was wearing construction boots indoors. And I cried harder than I had the day I left Eric. Because leaving isn't the hard part. Living afterward is. Divorce turns life into logistics. Lawyers, custody schedules, health insurance, utility bills. You stop feeling like a person sometimes and start feeling like paperwork. Eric fought harder during the divorce than I expected. Not emotionally, strategically. Donna explained it to me one afternoon while we sat in her office drinking burnt coffee from a Keurig machine. "He's not trying to save the marriage," she said. "He's trying to save the version of himself that existed before people found out." And she was right. Eric suddenly became deeply concerned about fatherhood in public. He posted photos with Emma online. Started attending church regularly again. Told people he was working through difficult family circumstances. Funny how men discover emotional depth once witnesses are involved. But privately, he was furious. Any boundary I set became proof I was vindictive. When I insisted all communication go through a parenting app, he called me cold. When I refused surprise visits, he called me controlling. When I asked him not to criticize me in front of Emma, he accused me of weaponizing the child. Donna once looked at me across her desk and said, "Some people confuse losing control with being mistreated." That sentence carried me through a lot. Financially, things got tight fast. I returned to work part-time at the high school sooner than I wanted because daycare costs were brutal. Every morning became a military operation. Pack bottles. Pack diapers. Find clean clothes. Try remembering whether I brushed my own teeth. Some days I arrived at work feeling like I'd already survived a full shift before 8:30 in the morning. The hardest part surprised me, though. Loneliness. Not romantic loneliness. Just regular human loneliness. There's something strange about becoming a single mother at almost 40. Most people your age already built stable routines years earlier. Their kids are older. Their marriages either survived or ended long ago. Meanwhile, I was showing up to pediatric appointments alone, carrying diaper bags and pretending I wasn't scared all the time. Some nights after Emma finally fell asleep, I'd sit on the couch in complete silence, just staring at nothing. Too tired to watch television, too restless to sleep. That's when the grief usually hit. Not grief for Eric exactly. Grief for the life I thought I had. Therapy helped eventually. I hated hearing that sentence when people said it to me, but it's true. My therapist's office smelled like peppermint tea and old books. She wore chunky sweaters and never rushed me. One afternoon, I admitted something out loud for the first time. I exposed him, I said, but somehow I still feel like I lost. She nodded gently. Because healing and winning aren't the same thing. That irritated me initially. I wanted victory. something clean and satisfying. But recovery isn't cinematic. Some days it's just managing to shower before noon. Patricia started writing letters around October. Actual handwritten letters. The first few were mostly excuses. I was trying to protect the family. I never meant to hurt you. Eric has always struggled emotionally. That last one almost made me laugh, as if emotional struggle accidentally creates 14-year secret children. I ignored her for weeks. Then one afternoon I opened a letter while Emma played on the carpet beside me chewing on a rubber giraffe toy. This one was different. Shorter. No excuses. Just one sentence that mattered. I should have told you the truth years ago. That was the first honest thing Patricia had given me. Eventually I agreed to supervised visits with Emma. Not because Patricia earned forgiveness, because Emma deserved the chance to know people honestly if they were willing to behave honestly. That became my rule moving forward. No more relationships built around pretending. Around Thanksgiving, Sandra called unexpectedly. I almost didn't answer, but I did. We met for coffee halfway between Dayton and Indianapolis at a Cracker Barrel off the interstate. Very glamorous. Sandra looked less tense this time. Still tired, but lighter somehow. Caleb had started high school football. Apparently he was terrible at algebra and obsessed with buffalo wings. For the first time he sounded like a regular teenage boy instead of evidence in a scandal. Sandra stirred cream into her coffee quietly. You know, she admitted for years I thought you were the problem. I nodded slowly. He told me you were unstable. She gave a dry little laugh. He told me you were cold. That almost made me smile. Imagine being described as cold by a man who demanded a DNA test beside a newborn bassinet. We sat quietly for a minute. Then Sandra looked at me carefully. Do you hate me? It was such an honest question that I answered honestly too. No, I said. I think we both trusted the same liar. We never became close friends after that. Life isn't a movie. But we stopped seeing each other as enemies. That mattered. A few weeks before Christmas, I mailed Caleb a small envelope. Inside were old college photos of Eric from before everything became complicated. Smiling beside cheap apartments, holding fishing poles, standing at football games with terrible hair. I included a short note. You deserved honesty from the adults around you long before now. I never told Eric about that package. Some things belonged to the children left cleaning up the mess. By winter, the divorce was finally finalized. No dramatic courtroom speeches, no big emotional ending. Just signatures, paperwork, final numbers. The strange quiet that comes after chaos finally burns itself out. One evening in January, I sat near the townhouse window watching snow fall while Emma slept upstairs. The whole neighborhood looked soft and peaceful under the streetlights. And for the first time in almost a year, I realized I wasn't waiting for disaster anymore. That feeling alone was worth everything. People hear stories like mine and assume revenge is about destroying someone. Honestly, it isn't. Not real revenge. Real revenge is refusing to let someone else define your worth after they tried to break it. It's rebuilding a peaceful life even when starting over embarrasses you. It's learning that being alone feels a whole lot safer than being lied to every day. And maybe most importantly, it's understanding that survival doesn't always look impressive while you're living it. Sometimes survival looks like secondhand furniture therapy appointments and crying quietly in grocery store parking lots before driving home to feed your baby. But it still counts. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, I hope you remember this. Starting over late in life is not failure. Sometimes it's the first honest decision you've made in years. And if this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Somebody out there may be sitting in their own parked car tonight wondering if they're strong enough to begin again.